You are here in the High Tunneling for Profit workshop. If you are not wanting to high tunnel for profit, you are in the wrong place. I'm going to get a thumbs up from my presenters who are hovering in the back of the room, which scares me. Paul, Annette, Matt, you guys want to come to the front of the room? Okay. Are we ready? Yeah, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Robin. I'm the Membership and Communications Coordinator for Oak, and I am so glad you're all here. It's just a thrill to be in this room with you. Couple housekeeping sort of things. Extension folks, ag professionals, CEUs are available. All the sign-up sheets are at the front by the registration desk. I will, by the end of this weekend, be known as Mrs. Survey. We love our surveys because it helps us plan future programming. If we know what you love and what you hate, write it down. So I've got two different surveys. One is the Oak pre-conference workshop survey, and the other is a paper version of a survey that our presenters created. The QR code is above me, so anyone that wants to use their phone and do that, they can do it that way. If you want a paper copy, I have them, and I will distribute them with the workshop surveys, which I'll get before I let you leave the room. It is my pleasure to introduce this group, although you're missing your third. We're missing Steve. We're missing this. I'm not going to repeat that. There he is. He's hiding in the back. I'm not going to take too long to introduce each of these presenters because they will introduce themselves in their own presentations. But I am very proud and pleased to welcome Annette, who is, I'm going to read a little bit because you're the Commercial Vegetable Extension Specialist at UT. And the last but not least is Matt Kleinhenz, who is the Professor and Extension Specialist in the Department of Horticulture at Ohio State University. And these are great examples of people that are working through the university system and also willing to share the space with farmer, which leads me to Paul Wiediger, who is certainly a Kentucky treasure and my personal mentor. And the only story I will tell is of 23 years ago today when I had a tiny baby carrying to the SOG workshop in Chattanooga, and there was Paul and Allison presenting on high tunnels. So it's been a really long, wonderful period of being able to learn from this man. So it's a great pleasure to announce this panel. And that's all I'm going to say. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, or afternoon, I guess, by now. So, I'm Paul Wiediger. My wife and I ran the Naturel farm, who's located right outside of Bowling Green, Annette National Park. Sorry. I do not like standing still. I would do my best. So we started growing in a high tunnel in 1995. We quickly grew to 5 high tunnels with about 10,000 feet in production. We were also doing about 1.5 acres outside. While we were doing that, we also maintained our grass-finished, rotationally grazed Murray Grey cattle. We did broilers and layers, and later on we introduced pastured pork. Before we get started, I would ask, if you haven't already done it, please set your phone to silence. Okay, feel free to take pictures with it, but if you need to take a call, just take it out in the hallway. So, I mean, this is the truth, right? It's all about local, it's all about eating good food. But for you as growers, this is a huge opportunity that you now have. I mean, this gives you a chance. You're not just going to grow throughout the summer months and then say goodbye to your customer and say, we'll see you next spring. What you're saying is, hey, you know, we're gonna continue to provide you with nutrient-dense food all year long. And at the same time, for you as a grower, this gives you an opportunity for cash flow every week of the year. So real quick, just so we all know what we're talking about growing in high tunnels. I mean, there are all different kinds out there. Right now, many of you probably have ones provided by NRCS. So you're looking at something that's probably 30 foot wide, 72 foot long, more than likely has a metal frame with poly on it. There's a few key things that high tunnels do, all right? I mean, they're somewhat magical, but they're also simplistic. So basically, number one, they're going to keep out rain. And what's important about this for you as an organic grower, this means your issues with fungal diseases is highly reduced. Other things they do is they give you frost protection. This is key in the, especially, let's say early fall, late fall, and early spring, all right? The next thing is they trap heat. And this is where they really come into their own in winter growing. That soil acts as a reservoir, trapping the heat during the day, releasing it at night. And last of all, they also give protection from wind. The biggest thing there, I say, if you're a cut flower grower and you're going to grow in a high tunnel, you don't want to put like zinnias on a sidewall. I won't tell you how I know that. We'll just go on. So basically, I mean, your high tunnel is creating its very own ecosystem. And what your job is to figure out how can I best utilize that in my marketing plan. So then I want to try to talk to you about what we did in fall and winter production at our farm over the years. So the first thing to look at is obviously temperature, right? So these figures are for Frankfort, Kentucky, a little bit different than mine and maybe a little different than yours. But what you see here, I mean, if you think of it, the light in September is the same light as you have in April. The problem is that the hours are actually decreasing, all right? And they come down pretty radically. I think I have up there, I mean, November 9th. In my mind, when you get to about the 9th of November, light has dropped enough that there is now a critical difference. Okay, your seeding dates are really going to change right now. Days to maturity are going to expand greatly. The other thing I think I've noted there is like at the end of February, you see how the light levels are coming up. And what you need to know is crops, if you've done cut and come again, things like kale, collards, chard, spinach, everything is going to want to bolt right there. A couple of things to be aware of. One, you know, out in the field in the end of the spring when crops start to bolt, they get really, really bitter. In your high tunnel in February, you don't get that bitterness, but you do see them producing a flower stalk. So what you need to be aware of is it's going to do that, so you need to have another bed ready to come on, ready for harvesting at that time. And obviously then we have to look at temperature. I mean, so basically rule of thumb, your temperature is dropping about 10 degrees a month. I mean, so from September to December, you're losing about 30 degrees. January, you hit your lowest. But as growers, I think what you really, really have to be aware of is obviously what we're living through, climate change. So at Christmas time, right, you probably all experienced like a 50-degree drop in temperature in a matter of a day, right? On my farm, we went from 45 to -5. But what you might not remember is we actually went through the same thing in October. So in October, about the middle, maybe the third week or so, on my farm, we were in the mid-70s. And by that night, we were at 27 degrees, all right? That's another 50-degree drop. So our very first frost was actually a hard freeze. So this is where a high tunnel really protects you, keeps your production going throughout the year. So a few things in my opinion, that's important. If it has to flower to set fruit, so here we're talking tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, a few other items like that. In my opinion, although it's possible, I think you're much better off staying away from those and concentrating on salad greens and items like that. I think they'll be much more profitable for you. I also tend to like crops that are cut and come again. I like to harvest mesclun and spinach multiple times, but also looking at plants like kale and collard and chard, where I can like strip individual leaves off the plant, so that plant will produce for me for many, many weeks, if not months. So what your job is you need to plan your high tunnel. It is just critical. If you cannot sit down on Labor Day weekend, throw back a PBR and say, hey, you know what, I think I'm not going to grow this fall. That's just not going to work, all right? You literally need to back this up into the summer. It takes a lot of work to do it, but we'll take you through some steps, okay? And for me, the joyous part is then you get to buy seed, right? I mean, who doesn't like that? Oh, God. Yeah, okay, fine. Record keeping is so critical. It's just, what I want to tell you is, what you're trying to do with your record keeping is build on your successes, so every year you're not having to reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, if I was successful the last 2 or 3 years, then I can do the same thing. But I'm also recording my failures, and this gives me an opportunity to try to figure out, why did I fail, all right? So it's critical. So so what are the key things? I mean, obviously, to me, it's, what did I grow? What is the specific variety? Where did I get the seed from? If this is my first year, I honestly would say, why did I even pick this seed out? Well, it was a pretty picture in Johnny's catalog. Well, fine, okay, but it didn't work well for you. So that's something to learn. The other thing I think is critical is like looking at, what was my spacing? Did I seed it? Did I direct seed it? Did I transplant it? If I seeded it for transplants, how many days was it in the flat before I planted it out? What size flat can I seed it in? And then also looking at things like days to maturity. I mean, you go into that catalog and it says, okay, this carrot is going to be ready to harvest in 55 days. Well, when they figured that day out, that was under optimal growing conditions. And growing through the winter is not optimal growing conditions. So if you record when you seeded, when your harvest is, you can actually figure out your very own days to maturity. And later on, that becomes important. And then obviously, yields. You have to know, how much am I getting out of this crop? What was my spacing? How did that affect yields? And then other observations. What was the weather like? Do we have extraordinary days of gray weather? And here we have a lot of that. At my farm yesterday was the 6th out of the last 8 days it was overcast and we had rain, okay? You have to be aware of that. Fluctuations in temperatures, insect issues. All these things play a key, and you recording that and making a note on it helps you make other decisions. So a few years ago, we developed this Excel spreadsheet. We're trying to gather a lot of information here. So for instance, on here, you'll see it. It's telling you what the crop is, how many days to maturity, if we're seeding it or transplanting it, if we're seeding it for transplant, what is the size flat we're using, where is it going out in our field, and you'll see there's even then room for, when we start harvesting it, because that's going to determine for us what are our days to maturity. The thing I like about this type of record keeping is depending upon the sort we do, we can get other information. On this sheet, the sort is being done by crop, so you have like cabbage, comma, the name of the actual variety, and that is the sort. On this thing, we also inputted what seed company we were purchasing it from and what was the catalog number. So later on, if we want to purchase the same seed, we can generate a purchase order right off this information. The thing I really like about it is you can go out there and easily change the sort. So what we would do is sit down. Now here we're going to sort by date, and then secondly by crop. And what that allows us, so now we have a sheet here, and if you look, so all these crops, we're all going to go and seed those in the greenhouse on February 14th or 15th, right? So I can take that list with me. It can generate a calendar from it. I can go and say, okay, if I'm going to be seeding something in the greenhouse on such and such a date, I know a couple of days ahead of time exactly what flats I need to have filled. How many do I need to have filled? If we're going to be planting lettuce in the high tunnel in Wednesday, that means on Monday I better get that bed ready to plant. So having these tools handy really makes you a much better grower. So these are basically the type of crops we grew. Let me talk about our market just real quick. So our marketing was direct to consumer. We mostly sold at farmers markets, but what we also did was we put out an email to our customers saying what crops we had available any given week. They could place an order with us. If it was during the farmers market, we would guarantee holding it for them till the end of the market. So they knew that even if they were late coming to market, they're getting really prime quality produce. And then once our market closed, we would actually deliver to their door on Saturday mornings. It worked really, really well for us. So in our high tunnels, all of our beds, I like wide growing beds. What I'm looking to do is try to utilize as much square footage of that high tunnel as I can. And I use 15-inch aisles. I mean, if any of you are in here, if you've ever read any of Elliot Coleman's, you remember he says, well, he likes 12-inch aisles. Well, if you ever met Elliot Coleman, if you see like a 7-year-old child, that child's foot is probably bigger than Elliot's. And that's why he can get away with a 12-inch aisle. I mean, for me, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work, all right? My boot is bigger than that. So, but the other thing too, a lot of times your harvest totes fit down really, really nicely in a 15-inch aisleway. So all of our beds are laid out the exact same way. Our beds along the outside walls are 30 inches wide with 3 rows of drip tape, and our interior beds are all 42-inch wide with 4 rows of drip tape. As we go through this, you're going to see a lot of slides with a lot of pictures. You're going to see 3-foot wide beds. You're going to see 4-foot wide beds. We learned as we went along. And as we went along, I somehow grew older. Well, trying to work in a 48-inch bed was not a problem when I was 40. But by the time I was 60, that was an issue. So I found that this layout really, really works well for so many crops. It's just easy to keep it all the same. So let's say you've got an NRCS high tunnel. It's 30 by 72 foot long. And you're going to start growing in here in September. So this is what it looks like. So early in September, you're going to put in potatoes. And you're going to say, well, hold a second. I can't get seed potatoes then. You're right, you can't. So you go to the grocery store, you buy organic potatoes, all right? It comes in a 3-pound bag. You're going to get about 15 pieces. The little ones you're just going to plant just like that. The bigger ones, cut them exactly in half, and they're all going to sprout at each end. Okay? And you're going to get them in August, and you're going to set them out to sprout and green chit, and they're going to be ready to plant. Okay? You're going to put in 2 outside rows in that bed, 1-foot centers. You're going to have 67 plants. The center bed you're going to offset by 6 inches, put in 66 plants. It's going to give you 200 plants. So the next planting date, we're going to put in our first planting of carrots. These carrots varieties I picked because each one will come on about a week after the other one. I'm glad I'm retired because on the 25th, you're all going to be really busy, okay? So up on the top, you're putting in a turnip. I love Hawkeye, okay? And then you're going to put in a planting. And sorry, forgot. I actually plug my turnips and my beets. And you're going to say, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Why in the world would you do that? Okay, I use a 200-cell plug. We're talking really, really tiny. And this is the reason. So years ago, let's say I hire Krista to come and work for me, okay? So the very first day, we go out there and I say, fine, you're going to harvest turnips, and you're going to put 6 in a bunch. Okay, so she picks that first one. It's perfect, like a golf ball size. She loves it, no big deal. She pulls the second one. Again, perfect. She's on fire. She picks the third one. The third one is half the size, a little bit elongated. And she's saying, oh, should I put that in a bunch or shouldn't I? And she hesitates. Well, then she picks number 4 beet while she's thinking of a turnip. Well, it's got a flat side because it grew jammed up against the other one. 27 minutes later, Krista comes to me in the other high tunnel, she has one bunch of turnips, and she says, "What do you think of this?" And I said, "Oh, that's fabulous. That's great. Okay, I now need you to harvest." She says, "No, I just got this one bunch." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, you just took 27 minutes?" Yeah, so if you plug them, you have time on the front end. You put one in at every 2 inches, everyone will be perfect. Somebody like Krista, maybe somebody like Robin, could actually come in, pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, put a band around it, bunch is done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On harvest days, you don't have time. You don't have time to think, okay? All you have time to do is harvest. But you have time on the front end to think when you're planting. So I really like crops like this, I like to actually plug. Okay, what else we do? Okay, spinach. Spinach, I'm just direct seeding. I'm doing actually 8 rows in there. There's 4 rows of drip tape, so I've got a row of spinach on either side of the drip tape. You got 8 rows. Lettuce, that's our first lettuce planting. Again, grown from we're transplanting, not seeding. God, there's other stuff in there. Okay, kales. Kales are a big hot item at my market or to my markets. We saw a lot of sales on collards and Swiss chard. So this gives you a nice planting. I'm going to say that for the kales and the chard, I will probably be able to harvest maybe even to the end of February from this planting, okay? So you're going to get a lot of turns. The other thing I try to work out with this display I'm showing you here is I'm looking to harvest about 20 bunches every week. And I feel, depending upon your market and how your marketing skills, I think you could generate between $500 and $750 in sales every week. Well, this week wasn't too bad. We're just doing another planting of carrots. You can see it's 3 weeks since the previous one. You're going to get 3 weeks of harvest off of that. Now you're going to get another 3 weeks. We've done our first seeding of arugula, and something else floated in on there. Oh, mustards, okay? So we got our first seeding of mustards. Okay, so here we're putting in another planting of lettuce. We're doing our first planting of radishes. And here again, too, we've got 3 varieties. So each variety's taking up about 1/3 of the planting. And again, we're doing like a 22, probably a 28, and a 35 day. So maybe something like Sora, followed by French breakfast, followed by redhead, right? Very, very 3 different, distinct, but they're beautiful, right? And now you have 3 weeks worth of radishes you can take off of there. From here, we're also doing our next plantings of both turnips and beets. And we filled in the bed of spinach. Now, basically, when we get into the winter, it's going to take 2 weeks for spinach to regrow so that we're going to need the 2 beds. Harvest the front of the bed the first week, the back of the bed the next week, and back and forth. Another planting of carrots, but you notice this planting has only happened 2 weeks later. And that's because the light and the temperatures are going to retard the growth of these carrots. Another planting of lettuce and another planting of carrots. Now this one's only a week later, but it's Bolero. Bolero is a great storage carrot, okay? I mean, it's going to grow, it's going to take its time, but it's going to sit out there for you. You can get weeks of harvest off of it until they're all gone. So another planting of radishes, putting in some more lettuce, and also another planting of arugula. So if any of you are sitting there with a calculator in your hand, you say, okay, you filled up that high tunnel, but Paul, hold a second. I mean, you've got like another 15 feet to plant in high tunnel on that first row. You're right, there is, okay? The only problem is if I get the print any smaller to fit up there, I can't read it. Okay, so you just have to know you have enough room there to do another planting of radishes if you want, or beets and turnips, it doesn't matter. But there is more room there, right? If I had the skills, I would now try to take crops out so you could see that harvest is going on and you're continuing to plant as you go along. I do not have those skills. So for us, this was one of our high tunnels in December. You can see it's full of product. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. You all have a lot of work before you get there. So, excuse me a second. So basically we're backing up now. It's mid-August going into September. You're doing a lot of seeding, either outside on flats on tables. If you're going to do that, I really seriously suggest covering the tables with a remay or agribond. What you're trying to do there is just keep out like the imported cabbage moth, so it's not laying eggs over everything. And then, and like you see on there, seeding kales, collards, chard, turnips, and beets. And in the high tunnel, you're getting the high tunnel prepped, ready for work. Huge issue. I mean, if you're going to be running a high tunnel, our high tunnels for us produce 52 weeks a year. So basically trying to maintain fertility becomes, God, boy, it's tough. I really highly suggest using compost. If you just want a rule of thumb to go by, I'd say somewhere between 2.5 to 5 cubic yards. And again, that totally depends upon how fertile your soils are, learning the soil, doing soil test, okay? I mean, that's what's critical. As far as I know, there are 2 sources of certified compost here in the state. One is Charlie's. They're, I don't want to say out of Owensboro area. I do believe they have totes for sale out of Deerfield and Elkton, if you're familiar. And I don't know anything about Thoroughbred, but I know they're listing OMRI certified compost, and they're out of the Lexington area. So going into this growing season, before we seed, we're getting the tunnels ready to plant, right? So we're putting in compost. I like to also do mineralization. And I fell in love 40 years ago with kelp. I really like, if you look at kelp and you look at its balance of minerals, I mean, in my way of thinking, it's a natural balance. I mean, sometimes you're going to have minerals in your soil that are out of balance, and you may need to address a specific problem. But if you don't, I really like the idea of just constantly having this available for the soil microbes. So, September into October, now you're getting into the high tunnel itself. You're doing like your first seeding of mesclun and spinach, seeding arugula, mustards, maybe other baby greens, seeding carrots, radishes, onions, planting potatoes, doing all the things you saw on that other slide. And you're also doing lots of watering. I can't emphasize so much how important water management is. It literally, there are so many factors to be aware of. One, you do not want to overwater, but you do not want to underwater. And the way I looked at it is, I tried not to use overhead watering. I felt that as an organic grower, the biggest problems I was encountering were many fungal disease issues. So if I could eliminate having water on these plants, that took away a lot of the problems. So basically, like here you see, I've seeded something, probably maybe mesclun, could be spinach, maybe even carrots, and I'd go over the bed with a watering wand, and I'm getting that bed wet. I think of it for a few things. One, I've fluffed the soil up, right? As I've added my compost, I've worked that into the soil, I've aerated the bed. And I think watering with a wand like this actually helps settle the soil, and in my mind, it's reestablishing capillary action so that the moisture is actually moving around the bed. And the other process it's doing, it's cooling that soil down. I mean, if you're walking in there in early September when it's still 90 degrees out, that soil is hot. It's much hotter than optimal germinating temperature for things like carrots or lettuce, okay? So what I wanted to do is I would water the bed till it looked wet like this, then turn on my drip irrigation. I want the top of that bed to stay wet. I say 48 hours. Honestly, I would rather it went 72, okay? And that gave me excellent seed germination. So here's one of the beds just like that, okay? So over here you can see mesclun crop has germinated nicely. I don't know if you can make it out on the slide or not, but that center bed is spinach, and it has excellent germination also. So talking about spinach, I mean, here are just a couple of varieties that I really highly recommend. They are smooth leaf. Space comes on a little bit faster than Corvair, but they're very, very similar. Both have excellent disease resistance to downy mildew, and they're very, very high yielding crops. I would say, I mean, if you've planted half that row, if you've got an NRCS tunnel, let's say, so you've planted 33 feet to it, and again, the interior beds are 66 foot long, giving you a 3-foot aisleway front and back to move around in and get your harvest totes in. I'm going to say you're going to harvest 16 to 20 pounds every week off of that bed, pretty regularly. So talking about mesclun or spring mix, again, now here we're talking, we start with lettuce. That's the heart of a mesclun or spring mix. You can change your type of lettuces you're planting by season. I know a grower, the only thing he grows is red and green leaf oak. Okay, that gives them 2 different colors and some texture, a different shape. I mean, but this is what this is all about. This is you want color, you want a few different shapes in your mix. You look on there, you can even see some model colored ones. And I also grow greens to put into my salad mix. I plant the greens separately. I think if you look at catalogs, often you'll see greens included with lettuce mixes. And what I find that often the greens grow faster, they get larger, so they're going to be bigger than what your lettuce is. That's the way I always try to grow it in separate beds. Some of my favorites are tatsoi. Sadly, this picture doesn't show what a deep green it is, all right? It's much darker than this. I like it because, one, it has a lot of weight. It's a very, very attractive green color. My next favorite is red Russian kale. I grow this for texture, loft, and color. After that is Mizuna. Again, a very, very mild oriental mustard. And I really, really love the purple Mizuna. It adds so much color and pizzazz to a mix. I mean, what you're trying to do is that when your customer puts this salad mix in their bowl, you want them to sit back and like, well, wow, this is beautiful. I also put arugula in. We also grew arugula separately. And also do a blend of spicy mustards. Often this would be something like golden frills, ruby streaks, red dragon, maybe it's dragon red, just a regular green one. Again, just trying to have different texture, different colors. So here are the rules behind it, in my mind. For spring and fall, it's almost guaranteed from the date I seed it to my first harvest is going to be about 21 days. And I feel like I can have good quality and I can reharvest that probably every 5 to 7 days. In the winter, it easily takes 28 to 35 days to germinate and grow to cutting size. There actually will have a slide in here later on. Top of my head, I'm going to say what we're going to see. It's going to be 45 days old, and it is not ready to harvest, okay? So that is how winter can affect these dates. But the other thing to be really, really aware of is that during, like, December and January, you're not going to be reharvesting these beds once a week. It's going to take at least 2 weeks and sometimes 3 weeks. So if this is something you want to have available for your customer, whatever that customer is, on a consistent basis, you definitely need to have multiple beds growing of it. And variations, right? So you can offer a lettuce-only mix. You can put greens into it, offer it as a salad mix. You can put spicy greens into it, offer it as a spicy mix. And if your greens grow too large, we'll harvest them separately and bag them up and sell them as a braising mix. So this one series of crops gives you many variations that you can market. The next thing I think was probably one of our most important crops was lettuce. So this is a tray of lettuce and brassica seedlings ready to go out. This is actually Salanova. I mean, this is just really, really gorgeous. On that example I showed where we had like 100 heads of lettuce in, it was shown to sell it over a 2-week period of time. So the first week, we're looking to do 20 bags of lettuce. So from there, we'll actually cut the whole head. We're not going to do this cut and come again. We'll cut the whole head, and we're going to give every customer 3 smaller heads of lettuce, okay? The next week, they're going to grow larger, all right? So the next week, everybody's going to get 2 heads of lettuce, but for the same value, because it's going to be a larger head. And from there, drip irrigation. I throw this in because, to me, this is, well, one, your poly is, it's excluding rainfall, right? So you have to have moisture, and you have to have it at a regular time. In this example, this drip tape is actually with emitters every 12 inches. If you're doing lettuce, like I showed in the example, you're going to want to use drip tape with emitters on every 8 inches on center. Okay, that's how you can get your 100 lettuce plants in a 66 row bed. So in this example, we're just trying to show, this video is going to run for 25 seconds. And you see me in there, and in 25 seconds, I'm going to put in 12 lettuce plants. So what I've done is I've turned on the drip tape. The soil looks red because we have a lot of sandstone in our soil, all right? But if I wait 15 minutes, I can come behind, pop that transplant out, and just stuff it in the ground. Don't have to make a hole, don't have to do anything else but that. I will say a couple things. One, my wife could plant 3 times faster than I could, so my job was just to pull the transplant out and throw it, hopefully on the ground close to where the emitter was. I failed. But the other thing on this picture, you see me kind of struggling a little bit on some of these seedlings. When we made this video, we were trying to get it done for a specific conference. So these seedlings are exactly 1 week younger than they ought to be transplanted. So the root ball hasn't fully developed. And what otherwise I'm trying to say is, I planted faster than that. And yet that's still really good fast planting, okay? That means if you're doing that in a high tunnel, you can plant a 30 by 72 foot high tunnel in a few hours' time, okay? A couple of you working together, you can plant multiple high tunnels in a morning's time. The key things you're going to see about that is when you plant at an emitter, the first thing you notice here is there's a plant growing everywhere. There are no gaps, all right? And I want to say it's not just 99% that every plant has survived. It's literally, we see it time and time again. 100% of the plants survive because they're being planted at the optimal place that they should be planted. But you also look at how uniform they are within varieties, okay? Again, that is because they're all at an emitter, they're all getting the right amount of water at the right time. So some of the other crops we grow, I mean, these are kales. On the one picture you see Russian kales with red borer in the front. What I want to say is, personally, I have a preference for Russian kales. White Russian is so much more productive. So I probably plant 60, maybe 70% of my planting will be white Russian kale. But I'll then also have other plants mixed around of red Russian kale and wild garden kales. They just add color and variety to the batch. Depending on the size or the market I have or how much I'm growing, my bunch is going to be somewhere between 12 to 16 leaves. If I have a lot, I'll put in 16 leaves. If I have a little less, I'll put in 14. If I have a lot less, I'll put in 12. And nobody has ever complained or argued with it. And some of the other kales that are available, I mean, you've got like green curly, you've got dinosaur kale. I mean, there's all different types of varieties that are out there. Some of this is just, again, if you're a market grower, it's about variety. I mean, at some point you'll figure out, oh, wow, you know, green curly kale, I can sell 3 bunches of that before I can sell 1 of something else. But you may have some customers that is what they want. So you can offer variety, which also makes your market look more attractive. Collards were a good seller for us. I will say I ran into a problem. You look at those are like beautiful collards, right? You don't even see one hole in them. And one day I actually had a customer come and say, I mean, there's no way you grow organically because there's no holes in your collards. And you have to say, well, there's no insects around for me right now this time of year, right? It's the winter time, right? I mean, so that's why they look this way. But this is probably my favorite green. It's tatsoi. Nobody knows it. I mean, if you have a CSA, I say grow it, stick it in your bag, right? I mean, if you go in the market, don't plant very many of them. It's just, pak choi is a great one. You'll see it here, it's on the sidewall. Really handles growing cold really, really well. And we'll actually do spacing like even 6 inches apart, maybe even 4 inches apart. So a friend of mine took this picture. This came out of his high tunnel. I mean, so you can see you've got a Chinese cabbage there. This is Michihili. It's a Napa type. Beautiful, beautiful sugar snap carrots. There's beets tucked in there. So carrots. I think this is a crop that a lot of growers have a hate-love relationship with, right? I mean, I know when I was marketing with my wife, my goal was to dig, wash, bundle, pack 65 bunches of a dozen carrots every week. And our market opened at 7 o'clock, and we never got much past 9 a.m. without selling out of carrots. And every Saturday afternoon, Allison would say to me, why aren't you bringing more carrots to market? And I would mumble underneath my breath, why aren't you coming out to the high tunnel and digging carrots? Adam Montre, do you remember that? He said the same thing, right? I made me feel good that he was under the same thing. But again, you can, in my opinion, you can name your price when you're doing carrots, all right? You know, it's just, again, my philosophy at market is set a high price, and if it doesn't sell, you can always come down, put a big sign that says sale this week, right? You know, figure out your price break that way. Robin, how am I in time? Am I good? I'm good? All right, fine. I'm getting closer, right? So I'll share a story about pricing. I shared this with Matt earlier. So one of our top selling items was spinach. If you're a one-person operation, you'll understand, I mean, that is back-breaking work, right? I mean, when you're harvesting, and for us, I mean, I was harvesting anywhere from a 45 to a 90-foot long bed, 8 rows in it, right? You think of how many hours you were on your knees, bent over, harvesting. And then after that, you got to wash it and pack it, right? So this was right after Katrina hit. Southern SOG was doing a conference in Louisville, 2007. And I just wanted to stop growing spinach. I mean, I hated it. And, but I knew if I told my wife, she was like, either she'd end my life instantly, or she would just tell me, no, you're growing spinach, right? So that was my option. So I thought, well, I've got to do this pretty sneakily. So we told all our customers we were going to be off for a week because we're going to a conference. We came back, I sent out my email, and I said, you know, hey, I am really, really sorry, but I need to increase my price on spinach. And I doubled the price. And in the previous, like if you bought a half a pound bag, it was $3.50. If you bought a pound bag, it was $6. I said, no, we're not doing that anymore. A half a pound is $5, a pound is $10. And I just sat back smiling. I thought, nobody's going to buy spinach at those prices. This is 15 years ago, right? And I'm like, oh, yes. And Alan said, well, you know, nobody ordered spinach this week. I don't know. It's on the email, right? No, our sales that week increased 30% by volume. Okay, I hate spinach. Thanks. Okay, so radishes. They're a minor item, but they do sell, and they're just so many beautiful shapes and sizes. They do fantastic on your sidewalls, so grow them. Chard is another, just absolutely beautiful. I like 5-color silver beet, but I also add in like either peppermint or there's a golden one, some other ones in there. This one may surprise you. Is we used to seed a lot of onions in October. Obviously, you know, probably thinking, okay, bunching onions. Yeah, we did bunching onions. But we actually grew our own transplants for the next spring. I mean, if you're growing onions and if you're buying transplants, 1, they're expensive. 2, they often come in really terrible shape. So we would seed our own. We're seeding them again in one of those beds. I mean, they're 8 rows across. Look how thick they're growing in there, okay? I mean, they're jammed in there. So we pull them probably like early March, clip the tops, clip the roots. We would actually plant them through plastic, okay? So again, this is our regular 42-inch wide bed. You've got the 4 rows of drip tape. So we're punching a hole every 4 inches. So in this high tunnel, the bed's 90 foot long. We're putting, anyway, you got about 2,200 onion plants going into there. And a lot of you say, well, that seems to be a waste of space, okay? But what I want to say is, especially in some of these wet springs that we're having, I know in this morning's session, Ray Tyler talked about his farm down in Selmer, Tennessee, a couple years ago, got like 125 inches of rain. I know where I live, down just outside of Mammoth Cave, our average rainfall is 50 inches. And not this past year, but the last 3 years prior, we've been averaging between 68 and 72 inches of rain, with much of it coming early spring, where we're getting 12 to 16 inches of rain per month. And these crops are rotting on us, okay? So doing something like this in a high tunnel not only guarantees you a crop, but look at the uniformity of size on those, okay? And these are in our barn loft curing. I was close, wasn't I? So we talked a little bit about potatoes. Again, buy them in organic store. You're going to get about the bags 2.5 to 3 pounds. You're going to get about 15 pieces per bag. So you can work it out from there. These are the plants growing. I have seen them grow in a warm fall, so rank that I actually had to drive rebar in along the edges and put in trellising with twine to hold them up. And this is what you're digging, okay? You can start digging around Thanksgiving. They're going to be a little bit small, but I did this a number of years ago, and we had them ready for Thanksgiving, and I asked $4 a pound. Okay, like who buys potatoes for $4 a pound, right? So, I mean, we didn't get a lot of orders, but we did get some, 1, 2, 3 pounds. And the next week I started getting orders for 10 pounds. And it was like, did you like hit a wrong key on your laptop or something? No, those were great potatoes. Well, I want 10 pounds, right? So again, between Thanksgiving and Christmas for something like this, you can literally name your price. And our average yield was about 1 1/10 pound per hill. Year after year, that's what we hit. So that's pretty easy to figure a yield out of that type of planting. Strawberries. I mean, if you have just one high tunnel, this is not a crop I would recommend. On the other hand, I will say, we were about 30, 35 minutes outside of Bowling Green. It was the only crop people would drive from Bowling Green to our farm to get, okay? And they never once asked what the price was. We used to just do it on a staggered row like this. The one thing I'm going to say is if you're growing them like September into the winter, they will start blooming on you, let's say even in January. If you want early fruit, you need to come up with pollinators. I mean, back when we did it, the thing was, you bought boxes of bumblebees. Well, one, they're expensive. 2, they last about 5, 6, 7 days, then they all die, and you'd have to buy another box. What I learned was that if I would go through there with a cordless leaf blower, I could pollinate them by that. It was fast, it was easy, it was cheap. And you can see, the berries they're just absolutely gorgeous, all right? So it's something, especially if you have multiple high tunnels, I would seriously suggest this as a premium crop. So blessed with our climate, we're literally able to grow all winter long. In this picture here, you can see, and I find this fascinating. If you look at the center bed, that's lettuce. This picture was taken back in the year 2000, I believe, all right? And that lettuce this lettuce I'm talking about right here, right? That was planted on Labor Day weekend. Not seeded, planted as a transplant. And so here it is, October, November, December, 90 days later, and it's still harvestable. And I will say this, with climate change, I do not believe you could do that anymore, all right? But what I want to get is, so over here in this bed, we've got newly planted lettuce going out. On the side wall, there's a crop of mesclun. You can't see it, but it's seeded there. So then winter shows up. So These pictures were taken on January 27th. This is the front of the high tunnel. It's 14 degrees out there. You can see it's covered with ice crystals. And you'll have to forgive me for this. Cross my heart, the only battery-operated clock I could find was this bird clock my mother-in-law had given me. And you're just going to have to believe that the robin sitting there says it's like 5 after 8, but the hand's a couple clicks past it. So you trust me, it's 7 minutes after 8. You can see how everything's frozen, and the thermometer is reading 22 degrees. This is red oak leaf lettuce. If you were to harvest it right now, it would literally just turn to mush, okay? It is frozen. So this is the same kale. It's an hour later. You can see the temperature inside has risen to 32. That oak leaf lettuce is coming out of it. This is 10 o'clock in the morning. It's 50 degrees. I often say, everything's recovering, but honestly, if you look at the kale, that kale is sulking, okay? It's like, dude, open a window here. It's gotten too hot for us. So, and here's that red oak leaf lettuce. I mean, look at that. That is as beautiful lettuce as you can find. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's 80 degrees. I mean, especially if you look at that little corner where you can see those lettuce plants, they look great. And this is outside. It's 19 degrees. It's still cold out there. All right, so remember those lettuce transplants that we put in on December 30th? You saw them totally frozen on January 27th. Here's that bed. So this is February 16th, and those lettuces are ready to harvest. And notice the mesclun. It has finally decided to germinate. It's been 45 days, okay? It's just, I don't have pictures of it. We literally planted another bed of mesclun since then that actually matured before that bed ever matured. So let's talk about some things we need to deal with to handle the challenges to winter growing. First thing we discovered, and again, a lot of this is just observation, serendipity. We had 2 high tunnels side by side. We had just put brand new poly on both of them. And the plant growth was significantly much better than the other one. Everything else we could determine was the same. Watering was the same, fertility was the same. We came to realize that I always love to grow in raised beds, but it takes a lot of work and effort to do that. And I got lazy, and on this high tunnel, I never got around to shoveling the soil out of the aisle and throwing it into the beds. So this is what I think of as flat bed growing. And this high tunnel did much, much better, okay? And what we found is that when we stuck a soil thermometer in, the soil temperature in these beds always, even in the dead of winter, was over 45 degrees, often approaching 50 degrees, all right? And that's critical because if you want soil microbial activity, you have to keep the soil temperatures basically above 45 degrees. The other thing we did is all of our high tunnels actually have double poly, and we're using an inflation blower fan. And what you see here, that's actually a dryer vent kit taped to that air intake on that fan, and it goes outside. And what we learned from this is if we did between the double poly and the flat beds, that the temperatures were pretty much on the coldest nights of winter at plant height, we're looking about 8 degrees warmer all the time. I mean, and that's day in, day out, that's what it was. So on here you can see this first high tunnel is pretty much clear. You can actually see the bows through the poly. On the black one, you can see a lot of water condensation between the layers. That's because we don't have it hooked up to outside air, and it's just recycling the air from inside that has a lot of moisture in it. Okay, so I really, really recommend that. If you do that, remember a dryer vent kit is meant to exhaust air, blow it out, and you're actually sucking it in, so you need to break that flapper off. Okay, that's in that white piece. So, to me, this is the next really critical issue in growing during the winter is ventilation. almost all the NRCS high tunnels I see out there are using roll-up sides. And that's literally the only ventilation you have. And that's great if you're growing tomatoes in the spring, all right? But if you want to grow during the winter, let's look back a few weeks ago when we had frozen precipitation on the ground. Do you really want to be rolling up your sides to vent that high tunnel? You need to vent it, okay? You need to move that moist air out. But I really don't want to be pulling in that ice-cold air. So instead, I've hooked up windows. They're both in the front and the back. What I can do is open those windows up and gently move air through, pulls out that moist air, replaces it with drier air. I can either leave them open for a while or I can leave them open all day long, but I really do recommend that. Next thing would be inner row covers. This was actually a courtesy of Hill and Hollow Farm. This was during that freezing cold at Christmas time, okay? So do you have multiple rows on this, multiple layers, or not on this one? There are 2 layers, yeah, So again, you can use multiple layers. I would even, when I went to change poly, especially the sidewalls, if they seem to be in good shape, I would cut those into 6-foot strips and keep them on hand. So I've actually used pieces of lengths of poly and row cover like this to cover it. This is, just a beautiful bed. Matt, did I steal this from you, or did I steal this from John Beerbaum up at Michigan State?
That looks like something you might have stolen from John.
Okay, fine. He's not here today, so I get away with it. Right, fine. And obviously, this is a university, and because not all the rows are covered, but they're trying to figure out how does covering rows affect growth versus not covering them. But that, I love the hoops. They're actually using, like a slitted row cover. Okay. Weeds. First thing I want to say, weeds and insects are not as big an issue during the winter. They are still an issue, okay? Don't get me wrong. That, where the arrow's pointing, that's actually red root pigweed. This picture is taken in November. This plant is this tall, 2.5, 3 inches tall. And I don't know if you can see it there or not, but the arrow's pointing, that's a seed head. It is literally trying to go to seed. It knows its day's ends are soon, right? And its only object is to fill your high tunnel with 10,000 seeds. So you need to deal with it. Yep, January 8th, and that's a dandelion in bloom. I used to try to tell people it was colt's foot, and I deliberately had it there, but that was a lie. So the other winter annual that you're going to run into is chickweed. And if you haven't grown in a high tunnel during the winter, if you're a market grower, you're only growing spring, summer, maybe into the fall, you're going to say, well, that's not a problem at all. Well, that's because it's a cool weather annual. When you see it in your April bed, it's declining, okay? Growing conditions are going from optimal to, I'm not living here, I'm out of here, right? So it's not a problem. Where it comes in is in the wintertime, you have given it like the optimal place it wants to live, and it can literally take over like this. It also can harbor both disease and other insects in it. So you want to make sure this is not the issue. I mean, if literally, when it's this size, you can knock it out with no problem at all. If you let it get to be something like this size, it's an issue. Scale-appropriate tools are important. On here you see scuffle hose, oscillating hose. They have all kinds of names. One thing I would say, I mean, as you get older and you need to take more breaks, keep a file in your back pocket. So when you need to take a break, you just take that file out and put a better edge on that hoe. Makes it look like you're not taking a break, you're busy sharpening that hoe. One thing I would like to tell you is that, you see how it's curved? When you sharpen that hoe, do not sharpen that curve. If you don't do that, it's going to allow you to cultivate running that hoe right up against your drip irrigation tape. And if you sharpen it, it's going to cut through that irrigation tape like a hot knife through butter. At least that's what I've been told. I mean, so let's talk about insect issues for a minute, okay? Again, it's not going to be as great, but you are going to have a problem. The first thing is early detection. I mean, to me, it's the use of yellow sticky traps, setting up a routine looking for them. recording your observations. I mean, maybe if you're young, your brain is still really, really sharp, you have one high tunnel, that's not an issue. As you get older and you're running 4 and 5 high tunnels, you're in high tunnel number 2 and you're thinking, is this what this looked like last week, or was that a different high tunnel? I mean, especially if you have a cell phone, just take some pictures, right? I mean, instant documentation. Obviously, the next step is you have to make sure you know what you're looking at. And lastly, in my mind, it's, there's a lot of information out there anymore, so you'll hear other growers say, these are the problems I have encountered this time of year. Pay attention to that and figure out, if this becomes a problem for me, how am I going to deal with it? So, to start with, when you're looking at scouting, establish a routine. Get used to walking through your high tunnel the same way. You're looking at a number of plants. You're recording what you're seeing. Are the numbers increasing or decreasing? You know what I have. So, Ray, you're going to love this one. So the number one insect issue I have in my high tunnels in the winters are aphids. I can tell you, outside growing in the summer, I have never had an aphid issue. So let's talk about why do aphids create such a problem. Okay, so number one, they reproduce parthenogenetically. So we're going to say, so here in the South, they are all females. They can start reproducing, they give live birth. They can start producing in about 7 days, and they can give birth to 5 new live pre-pregnated female insects for the next 30 days. So we're saying it's like, so one aphid, we're going to call her Annette. She shows up on December 31st, walks into your high tunnel, and she's like, whoa, smorgasbord. And you make the foolish decision not to interfere with her life. And 1 month later, you go in there and the Census Bureau shows up and they want to know, well, how many aphids are now hanging out with Annette? And you realize, according to these numbers, there's somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000 aphids now hanging out in that one high tunnel. Yeah, Ray, this is why they're a problem. Right, yeah. Anyway, so we have very, very dense plantings in our high tunnels. Gives them a lot of room to hang out without being detected. The poly excludes rainfall, so you're not getting knocked off the plant. You also don't have the insect diseases. They reproduce at much lower temperatures than your parasitoids. And actually, if you have things like lady beetles and lacewings, you actually can run into a greater problem with it. So, aphid control. Early detection is key, all right? That's through scouting. There is literally no economic threshold to aphids. You see the first one, take care of it. Start dealing with it, okay? Trap crops. They really seem to like kales and mustards. I have a video that if I didn't have such a shaky hand, I would love to share it with you, but it looks like, one of those horror pictures, right? So, but in this bed, there are mixed kales growing, all right? So there may be a plant of white Russian kale, a plant of wild garden kale, a plant of red Russian kale, and they're all touching each other, okay? Well, if you turn over, and you always want to look at the lower leaves, that's where they love to hang out. If the leaf is touching the ground, that is definitely where they're going to be. Well, if you look at the white Russian, you cannot find one aphid on the plant. But you turn over the leaves of the red Russian kale, you may have 150 to 500 aphids on a leaf, all right? So what I like to do is go in there with a bucket. I break off the lower leaves that are infested, put them into my bucket. I was having chickens, so I would take it out there. They love the greens, but they love the protein from the aphids. Then you come back in with, let's say, an insecticidal soap spray. But just remember, you're not only just spraying the leaves, you also want to spray the soil around it, because as you broke those leaves off, you may have dislodged some live aphids. So you're trying to smother them right then and there. And I also recommend, in something like this, like a battery-operated backpack sprayer. They're not a lot of money. What I like is they have when the pressure is constant, I think they actually produce a higher PSI, so I can get a much finer droplet. I like them with a long wand where I can actually turn the knob up, drag it along the ground, and I'm spraying up underneath those leaves. Other things you can do is, again, we talk about insecticidal soap. Neem-based products work if the soap has gotten away from you. You can introduce lady beetles and lacewings. Just be aware, this works in the spring as it's getting warmer. I mean, lady beetles take off at about, and increase and are active at about 75 degrees. If this is the winter, lady beetles are not going to be handling an aphid issue for you, all right? And by the way, again, talking about identification, that is a lady beetle larva, okay, in case it's not a Game of Thrones dinosaur like you thought, Madeline, okay? So, but the thing, you can't ignore it, okay? You just cannot ignore it. This problem is not going to go away by itself. If you'd like to know more about insects, there's a program tomorrow afternoon by Dr. Larson. He'll be talking specifically about insects in your high tunnels. I highly recommend that. And really, you know, going out of here, I mean, today there's lots of information just out there at your fingertips. You type in high tunnels, and there's just all kinds of great information out there. University of Kentucky has a lot of materials. This is one of them here. Rachel will be speaking tomorrow, but I think she's talking about grafting tomatoes. But again, a lot of resources available to you. When you came in today, you should have been able to pick up a book at the front. If you haven't, please make sure you grab one before you go on out. The book's a bit dated, but it still has a lot of good information in it. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can visit our website at anfsolutions.org or email at info@anfsolutions. So, can I answer any questions? I've put you all asleep. Wow, did I do a good job?
Okay, I think I've been given the high sign, and I unfortunately need to interrupt the excellent conversation that I know is very, very important. It's one reason why we're here, and I've been talking with folks most of the day since I arrived about that very thing, how important the conversation has been, and it continues, you know, will continue to be, and how nice it is actually to get together in the same room with folks. The Zoom thing is appropriate. It helps. It was important. But this is obviously a much better situation. And I was, again, just having a brief conversation about that one of the benefits of coming to a program like this is that you pick up so much. And we heard from Paul. I've been fortunate to hear Paul speak many times, read the book, and Allison. And I just get lessons every single time. So I very much appreciate his input today and all the input that I'm receiving. My name is Matt Kleinhenz. I'm with Ohio State University. I'm based at the Worcester campus that it was formerly known as the Ohio Agricultural Research and Development Center, the OARDC. You might know it by that name. I've been there since the fall of 1998. I've been working full-time, if you will, with high tunnel systems since about 2002. Installed our first high tunnels in 2003 and have been working with them since, including, very importantly, as managed organically. So going back quite a few years. Actually, our first high tunnels were managed organically. Before I get into my slide set, I'd like to just call your attention to the QR code that's up on the screen behind me. For those who are comfortable using a QR code, if you open that code, it'll take you to a link that takes you to the information sheet that is also in yellow, making its way around. What I was circulating before, this yellow half sheet, is exactly the same information that you could fill out online using the QR code if you prefer. You might be wondering, we're here to get information, not to give it. Why are we asking for information? Well, as you heard Paul say about the University of Kentucky, you hear from Annette about the University of Tennessee, I'm here with OSU. we're just a small number of people who are working on your behalf, more or less nonstop. Sometimes with you, obviously, with doing work on your farm in one way or another, and of course, we're working on behalf of other farmers too. And we are more effective when we have some information to go on. So that's what the information sheet is about. You'll notice that no one is asking for your name, your contact information, nothing like that. We're just hoping to learn a little bit more about, very little bit more, key facts about your operation, particularly as it applies to high tunnels and high tunnel production. So appreciate your taking advantage of that. And if you leave the paper, if you finish the paper version, all you have to do is leave it on your table. We'll come around and pick it up later, okay? So if you could switch over to my slide set, we'll get started on my particular topic, which is the a soil health component of high tunnels and an overview on how to manage those. There we go. Okay. So we had an excellent set of input from Paul. What I hope to do in the next 40 to 45 minutes before transitioning to Annette's comments on cover crops and cover cropping, which is again part of the conversation we heard at the end of Paul's Q&A period. What I hope to do in the next 40 to 45 minutes is zero you in on the soils that your high tunnels are covering, okay? And I hope to impress upon you or bring up some questions about the role that soil is playing in the overall success of your farm and your high tunnel business, okay? And to cover a few of the challenges and I would say opportunities associated with all of that. All right, so we'd like to maintain the focus, maintain a bit of a focus on the soils in your high tunnels and how to keep them productive. I think we would all acknowledge that you don't get paid cash for the soil under your high tunnel, but you do get paid cash for what you produce with that soil or using that soil. So I think it's just a logical leap to say, you know, if you maintain the quality or the health of that soil, the productivity of that soil, so will you also maintain the potential for you to make some money there. So please raise your hand if you've installed or have had installed a high tunnel on your farm. Great. So please raise your hand if you thought that selecting the site for that tunnel was super easy. Okay, fewer hands went up. Here's how it begins, right? A site is selected, posts go in the ground, some top frame goes over the top, whether it's a Quonset or a Gothic style. You know, now all of a sudden you've got a frame on your frame, and of course it's always happening on a beautiful spring day or a fall day. Then the top goes on using OSHA-approved practices. For sure, nothing but OSHA-approved practices, okay? Eventually the cover is there, and as Paul referenced, all the many benefits start to accrue, potential benefits start to accrue at that point. You start producing like crazy. It's like, oh, isn't this fantastic? There are no weeds, no pests, no diseases, no problems, you know, absolutely no problems. You start going to market, whatever that market is, whether it's summertime tomatoes or fall time or, wintertime spinaches or lettuces, what have you. But, okay, some stuff can happen, right? Things like this, they do happen. You wonder about the maintenance and the upkeep and so forth. I mean, you have this structure now. Where there was no structure, there is now a structure. However, you may describe that structure as open-framed, soft poly-covered. However, quote, not a structure it is compared to the other structures on your property, it's still a piece of soil as you've covered. And we know why we go to all that trouble and expense. You just heard some of it, right? We all raise your hand if you do have a high tunnel, right? Most people, okay? Some people do not. Raise your hand if you're thinking seriously about getting a high tunnel. All right, so you're here, all of us are possibly here because we either have a high tunnel and we've seen the benefits or we've heard about it, but we don't have one yet, and so we're a little bit more curious. In most cases, installing a high tunnel is a big commitment to that parcel of soil that you've just covered, right? So you're going to rely on that parcel very significantly. And in my humble opinion, we know a lot more about the soils outside that aren't covered than we do about the soils that are inside and covered, right? For those that have been using a high tunnel, raise your hand if you have more than 10 years experience. Okay? Raise your hand if you have 0 to 10. More. Okay. Why did I ask that question? I would say last week when I was at a grower meeting in Ohio, a farmer from North Carolina asked me, so how long have you been working with high tunnels and so on? I said, well, about 23, 24 years. He started asking about nutrient management and soil, very specific aspects of the soils. You were talking about the specific questions to ask, that you get to later. I said, it's possible that there are only X number of people who have 20 or more years of experience using a single parcel of land under high tunnel. We're running this experiment right now with what happens to soils when you cover them. This is like unfolding every crop cycle. So 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, regardless of your perspective on the longevity of your farm and how much you're going to have a role, that's all important. But if that cover is going to remain on the high tunnel more or less continuously for X years and be used in the way that high tunnel systems tend to be, like shorter rotations and all this, we don't really have a playbook for what happens to soils under those situations. We're learning as we go, right? So I'm spending a minute emphasizing that we just really, in our most general opinion, can't take what we know is true from outside field production and say, well, that's the way it's going to happen in a tunnel. No, it doesn't rain in there, it doesn't freeze thaw, all that stuff, right? So keep that in mind. High tunnels under soils tend to be a little bit about what you see on the slide behind me. They have a lot of different temperature ranges, soil moisture ranges. They're worked more intensively and more often. The water distribution is not uniform like it is. It rains outside and everything gets soaked. Now, it may drain differently, but everything at once gets soaked. Inside, we're using drip irrigation most of the time, and so we're wetting very specific areas, not all areas. And also, we have a different crop selection that happens inside. So all of these factors and more influence what happens to the soils beneath them. And here are just a few temperature dynamics. Krista's data, okay, via Annette coming back. But what we want to emphasize is, I think what Paul emphasized at one point, the soil never froze. It never got below 45 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was important for the microbiota. So we have different nitrogen mineralization and organic matter conversions and everything going on in the tunnel that we do outside. So if you are farming outside and you also look to farm in a tunnel, you might have to have like 2 brains, a high tunnel brain and an open field brain, in terms of at least a basic knowledge of like what could happen or doesn't happen inside the tunnel. So when we talk about soil health, you've probably seen this slide before. It is the product of physical, chemical, and biological all linked into one. Where all those 3 come together, that's what we're talking about, the health component. We can get into the so-called weeds or the details on that, but we won't. Let's just agree that each one of those have multiple components, right? If these soils are managed organically, you rely on very specific combinations of those 3 properties, okay? Sorry, I'm going backwards here, hit the wrong button. You rely on very specific characteristics or components of those 3 aspects of health for the soil to be productive. Can't say like I'm going to put all my attention in the physical box, the chemical box, the biological box. I really love, microbial biostimulants, so I'm going to load up on the biostimulant side. Well, that's great, but what about the physical and chemical? Are they even alive after you've applied them? Just as one tiny example, all right? So, we're relying on those quite a bit. And this is what can happen. Now, I happen to have used this slide in Australia about, well, 6 or 7 months ago, and completely out of the blue. So one guy says, you know, that's an Australian car in there. Why did you choose an Australian car? It was completely by accident. Anyway, this, for anyone who has loaded anything onto any contraption, a trailer or a car or a van, you know you can overdo it. Okay, this is just a visual illustration of the load that we're putting on our soils. Okay, the soil is, I keep touching the wrong button, the soil is something that can carry a load. You have certain expectations of your soil. What are your expectations of your soil, possibly? You're going to use a lot of fertilizers, maybe not this group, but certainly people are going to be applying things to the soil. They're going to be fertigating in some way, usually. Let's face it, vegetable crops, most crops grown in a high tunnel, they're wimpy. They have very small, shallow root systems. They don't tend to have big root systems. They're not returning a lot of organic matter to the soil that way. We often grow them in short rotations. Again, we're using that drip irrigation, all the items that are listed on the screen here. This is what I say is the load that we expect the soils to carry. And to me, I am not terribly qualified to give you technical information on what you're seeing on this slide. It's more of a concept that if you add all that together, it can be more than the sum of the parts. That certain things can carry more weight than others and be more impactful. So the end result might be, you know, you end up spending more money to achieve maybe the same productivity or not, and it's just cutting into your profit potential. So that's, I mean, if you're growing for profit, if you really want to make a living using the soil in the tunnel for a long time, you have to mind your P's and Q's that way, and you'll be concerned about your profit potential. So these are some of the issues that I have seen and I've experienced in the tunnels that I manage. Of course, I'm not walking in your shoes growing for profit, but these are some of the issues I have seen and I have heard about and I've been told about. Loss in soil structure, declines in organic matter unless you're really, really committed to replenishing organic matter in some way. We heard about additions of compost and other approaches. Compaction, I mean, the same tracks. Paul said you can't walk on the bed. Well, you can't walk on the bed, but you are walking in the aisles. Well, where you walk in the aisles, that is going to become really firm because that's where all the traffic happens, right? So, makes total sense. Somewhere has to be, but there's some compaction. Some salinity buildup, depending on the use of what's put into the soil. Soils can flood. All of a sudden, the soil in the tunnel is staying wetter longer. Is the water coming in from outside? Is it coming in from outside but up from below? Is it the irrigation that's being put on top that is now hitting a plow pan of sorts that is not letting it drain through? All of a sudden you're noticing that your soils are staying wetter longer. Nutrient imbalances, if we're growing the same crops using basically the same fertility program over and over again, all of a sudden additions of the same materials can lead to imbalances. And of course, there's the ever-present potential for disease inoculum to build up, right? So, if you go back to that list, impossible to cover all of those issues in terms of what to do about each of them today, here, in detail. This is more about whetting your appetite for learning more, okay? This is more about whetting your appetite to say, hey, if somebody from UK or KSU or whomever says, hey, would you like to have your tunnels, you know, studied from a disease standpoint or whatever it might be, you know, perhaps consider that possibility. More about whetting your appetite. These are some of the steps I've seen people take with various levels of success to address those issues that we just showed a moment ago. So we heard a little bit about ASD, the anaerobic soil disinfestation. You know, pros and cons there. It does work. It also ends up taking some time out from the production cycle. It may have to be repeated, but ASD is legitimate. Or solarization, that would be, and often it's a wet solarization as opposed to a dry solarization. And ASD and solarization are not the same. Rotation, and we're going to hear from Annette soon about rotation and cover cropping, which is really, really important. That may also require a secondary irrigation system. Sometimes that's an overhead one. Amending the soil can be very, very important. This can help correct imbalances, can help maintain organic matter levels, can help maintain tilth, can reduce compaction or mitigate compaction. Some people treat their irrigation water. They look at their irrigation water and say, actually, that's part of the problem. So I pre-treat the irrigation water before I apply it. It could be chemically, something about it chemically could make that repeated applications of that irrigation water to that soil, which does not get rain on it, problematic. Excuse me. Tilling deep in a high tunnel? Yes, some people find that necessary. I think I'll have a slide or two from Penn State University where they were doing that with Steve Bogash and others. Flooding the tunnel. Some people turn the water on or, turn the water on and just soak it through between crops. Moving a high tunnel. Or buying a movable tunnel. So we usually don't want to pull up those posts that we took such great care in pounding in. But if you haven't yet bought your tunnel or your next one, and you're thinking very carefully about your soil health and your situation, you might find a movable tunnel to be very important. We have 1 out of our 10 at OSU are movable, and we've really liked it. A coverless fallow system. This would be removing the top, letting Mother Nature take some of its course or her course, and rainfall, snow melt, and the like. Or, it's possibly the last resort for some people, and they no longer rely on the soil in their tunnel. They instead go to container production. So these are just 2 examples of people familiar with ASD, Rachel Rudolph at UK, and David Butler at the University of Tennessee. Sally Miller and Francesco Gigoia at Penn State University is also really well versed in ASD, and Sally Miller I know is at Ohio State is as well. Rotation and cover cropping, we're going to hear more about that, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. It's a very, very important unit. It's a very, I think, perhaps underappreciated component of high tunnel production and the rotation question. What can I put through there and still maintain my cash flow that I'm looking at? I know that we've looked at this, but not in a very, shall we say, deliberate sense, but we have attempted to incorporate summertime cover crops between our experiments or between our so-called cash crops. And here I'm showing cowpea, pearl millet, ground pea, tillage radish, and oat combination, depending on the time of year, okay, just as examples. An overhead sprinkler situation may help you there, and we have a little guide, as do other folks, on installing a really low-cost but very highly effective overhead irrigation system to complement your drip one. So, if that interests you, please let me know, or I can point you in the direction where you can find it. Amending the soil, very important as well. And here we're showing a dairy manure compost. We have tunnels at my place that we have amended every year for about 18, and then those same high tunnels, the opposite side has never been amended. So we have really abused, or not abused, 1/2 of several tunnels and tracked their condition over time. And it's pretty striking. So amendment can be very important. I was asked to give a little summary on this some years ago, and we're talking about manures and compost and maybe some other amendments. There's a lot of different kinds out there. Just so many that we could have an entire day, a whole unit on compost or amendments. It would really bear that out. I would just encourage you to be careful. Look carefully at what you're applying to the soil. If the price is too good to be true, it's probably not something you want. I'll spare you all the anecdotes, but I know that and I think my counterparts at other universities have all been experienced at one time or another working with a farmer who put something on their soil that they were given for free. It was great. And now they have a problem, okay? Check the amendment very, very carefully. And if at all possible, change them up, because they all have their unique combinations of composition, right? And repeated application of the same material could lead to the same kind of imbalances that you're trying to avoid. I'm showing a lot of slides, and you might be wondering, there's no way in green earth that I could take in the content that you're showing on the slide and listen to you at the same time. I'm trying to use the slides as a supplement to what I'm saying. And of course, these visuals will be available. I think Oak is recording this, so these visuals should be available to you, but just contact me if that's an issue. I should have said that up front. I tend to have a lot of slides and forget that I should mention, please don't study them. If I linger on something, that might be more important. But the point is that these particular supplements all have their own personality. They decompose differently and at different rates. They add things at different rates. They all have their personalities. So get to know the personality of the amendments that you're trying to use or thinking about using, and work with them. You know, we all have personality. You know, you have to work with them. So work with the personalities of what you're trying to present. They can represent a significant, investment for sure. Whether you're making the amendment or somebody else is making it, pay close attention to it. Like I said, it's very important for that to be consistent and predictable. Purity is very, very important. Gap or food safety may be an issue here, so do not let that pass. Just don't give it a free ride and say, well, that's an amendment. No, got to pay attention to that. It has to conform to standards. They can draw your soil productivity one way or the other, as I mentioned before. Not all amendments are not good, if you will. All amendments are not going to have the same benefits, so be mindful of that possibility. And like I said, repeated application of the same thing can end up creating another challenge. So if possible, change up what you're amending the soil with. My question now, this is just not something we can answer here, is that we often think of growing in place the cover crop, and we struggle with that because, boy, I don't really want to give up the production time. So I've been wondering, well, why can't we produce it outside and bring it into the tunnel? Is that something that could be done effectively on lower cash ground, if you will? We could grow our own cover crop, bring it in. Now, it's obviously not doing the same thing because the roots aren't there, but we can bring organic matter into the tunnel that we can produce outside very reliably. So that's something I'd like to look into more carefully. So overhead shot of some of the tunnels I work with. Movable tunnels. What you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner is a homemade high tunnel. There are many of these on this particular farm in northern Ohio, just south of Lake Erie. Those tunnels are drug around the farm at will by the tractor that you see and put over really high cash-earning leafy vegetable crops. So those are well casings with holes in them. So, of course, you can have the standard high tunnel that you could buy a kit for, but you can also improvise. And, of course, down in the lower left is Elliott Coleman's place in Maine. We have a Rimmel system. It's really nice. It's powered by that solar panel, which charges a battery, which runs the inflation fan and the control panel and the sidewall motors. It's been running constantly since 2015. We've replaced the battery one time. You can move it with wheels. You can move it with rollers. One person or two people with cordless drills can do it, or a small tractor or a vehicle or a truck. Actually, myself and one other person pushed the tunnel when it was on rollers. So this is a 30 by 50 unit, and it can move from one point to another really nicely. What I like about it is it's not on rails, and you can move it anywhere on the farm as long as you can turn it, and you can in this sense, okay? So we've got a bit of a video on that if you'd like to learn more. But that's, I think, one of the earlier generations of the movable feast tunnels. So like I say, we got the cables hooked up here. In this case, we used the cordless drills to pull it. And, of course, they have some of these at the Center for Plasticulture at Penn State University as well. If you ever get a chance to visit there, please do. It's an interesting facility. Four Season Tools will give you a kit, basically. Here are 4 tunnels. Here's a rotation. Go to work, all right? And what I always like about this, no offense to the folks there in Illinois, what I always love about this picture is that every one of them is on tabletop flat ground, okay? And I don't know about you, but we are not blessed with tabletop flat ground. So our version of this would have to be kind of small, if you will, for most situations. But anyway, movable tunnels are a potential component of your overall soil health management program, soil productivity management program for your tunnel. And the designs are improving, okay? Now, I think Annette will be showing this slide, so I do not want to take too much time to cover it, these two. But what she'll illustrate is a possible rotation that involves, incorporates the approach that I'm talking about here, which is, cash and so-called non-cash crops working in concert with each other to ensure the high yield and high quality of the main cash crop. And I know that there are crops that we do not get very much money for or don't sell at all, and so we call them the rotation, not cash crop. That's true. But they're there in part to maintain the income potential of the cash crop, okay? We get water in tunnels sometimes that we don't want, and I was practicing sometime furrow irrigation. Undesirably, I didn't want this to happen, but this is what did happen. I wasn't experimenting with furrow irrigation, but this is what happened. And so flooding in a high tunnel is, to me, kind of a potential sign that either the site was not selected well, it was not prepared well, or it's possible that over time, the soil has lost its capacity to handle water, you know, the same amount of water that you're now getting. So what is that a sign of? Is like, again, is it compacted? Is there, what's going on that would prevent that water from infiltrating, okay? Could be poor internal drainage. So it's kind of a sign, it's a bellwether. And, you know, we all know the soil is a mixture of water, air, and solid fraction, and organic fraction, and they should be present in these approximate amounts. You know, you want to have a lot of air in the soil, actually. It's very important to have air in the soil. And during irrigation or rainfall, some of that air is temporarily replaced by water, which is good. But you don't want to have a lot of water-filled space all the time. That's a problem. So folks have been asking, including the folks at Penn State, you know, should we consider deep tillage in a tunnel? I mean, do we think we have a so-called plow pan in there? So Steve, when he was with Penn State, was looking at this along with some others, and yeah, they actually did rip that soil in the tunnel. I think it was every 3 years or so, just to help ensure that wasn't, you know, that layer wasn't developing. Uncovered winter fallowing is an idea that an academic like me is free to say, hey, you know, consider taking the cover off your tunnel. Well, this is one of the tunnels we work with. We took the cover off in the fall. We decided we weren't going to recover it until the spring. And so we let nature do what nature can do during the winter. One cautionary tale about this, you'll notice that the two end walls have the doors removed. Any wind that comes along that wants to push on that end wall that has the door or the ends as resistance, it literally pushed our tunnel out of plumb. Okay? So I learned the lesson, number one, at least take the doors off. Two, if there's vents there, take the vents out. Reduce whatever resistance I could at the end wall. We have hard poly end walls to prevent that reoccurring. But anyway, uncovered winter fallowing can open up the tunnel to what we call cryo, you know, freezing perturbation. This is just a natural freeze-thaw action of soils. And whether or not you've looked carefully at this or you already have some working understanding of it, when it freezes and thaws, even at the top 4, 6, 8 inches, it actually mixes as it's doing that. It's actually turning over. So that freeze-thaw action can be very, very useful. And then finally, as I'm beginning to wrap up here, you know, some people say, you know, given the nature of the soil that I started with, it was already kind of difficult soil to work with. It's only become more so. I think containers or raised beds are the direction I need to go. I hear you loud and clear. We have, and I was very fascinated to watch, to look at Paul's pictures. The two pictures that you're seeing here, one was taken in one of the high tunnels we have. We have wood-framed raised beds in 2 of our 30 by 80s. And the other picture was taken in southeast Ohio, south central Ohio, at what was then Green Edge Gardens farm. Kip and Becky have retired, but they had literally PVC frames on the ground into which they filled with the rooting medium because their specialty was greens, and the rooting depth of many of these plants is only like this much. So they said, wow, why do I care if I have 8 feet of soil underneath those roots if I can turn that rooting medium over often? And they had great success with that. And what you can't see in here is that they also heated that soil, which is something I'm also very interested in, but is a subject for another time. So container production is a legit option under the circumstances where your calculations and your experience tell you, I put this high tunnel up, but I can no longer maintain productivity in the natural soil at a level consistent with my goals. Container production becomes more of an option that way, especially if you'll notice that working with crops that are best suited for container production. Okay. And I mentioned treating the irrigation water. It may be important, and I'm throwing this in here because that will come into play particularly at a particularly high level when you're using container production, because you tend to use then at that point a smaller amount of medium relative to the amount of plant material, and so the role of the irrigation water could become a bit outsized, if you will, okay? So, and that draws attention to the salinity question that I mentioned earlier. Whatever the nature of our water to begin with is, plus what we may add to the water, or we add to the soil that has salt in it. Composts have salts, manures have salts. Whatever the source of the salinity may be, we have to acknowledge that the plants are largely removing water and, of course, some nutrients, but they're leaving many of the salts behind. Where will that salt go if there's not a lot of flow through of water to rinse it out? That's the question I'm leaving you with. All right, so I'm wrapping up, and we can turn to questions if we have a couple of minutes. However you choose to approach your high tunnel production, remember that you've paid for the opportunity to include high tunnels in your business. You put out cash on the table to make that happen. Soil health or soil productivity is key to maintaining them as an asset. Otherwise, they just become a frame with plastic. A number of strategies are available to you to help maintain the productivity of that soil, and that even small investments can matter. Okay? I would discourage you from thinking that it has to be an enormous outlay of cash at any one time to maintain the productivity of that soil. It's probably more about smaller investments along the way. And since some of you raised your hand when I asked if you have 0 to 10 years of experience or don't have a high tunnel at all, this is the time to start thinking about that, okay? The time to start thinking about the productivity of your soil is before and as you are covering it, ideally, okay? For those with a lot of experience, you've come to understand that in different ways, and maybe you're seeing some adjustments may be needed, or that you've found a path to what works for you. And then I'll just leave you with this one last slide. I always leave this last. It's a way to end on a downer, okay? No, this is a slide that I first saw years ago at a Great Plains Growers Conference in Kansas City. And it kind of just stuck with me, as some things can do. And the speaker at that time was referring to some of the topics I was covering here today. And they said, look, really, really important to appreciate that increased yield is often the last effect that you see of most soil management practices. This is not a fix-it overnight situation. This is not a silver bullet situation. What this means is, if you start on a soil management program to really enhance the productivity of that soil, increasing your yield may be the last thing that you witness. And before that, you'll start seeing changes like they show here. Better water infiltration. The soil aggregates will be more firm together. It'll hold more water and more nutrients. It'll start behaving differently. There'll be less resistance. You might change your weed pressure. You might change a lot of aspects related to the crop before you start seeing these dramatic increases in yield. And this can be problematic because, of course, that's what we get paid for, typically, okay? But I'd like to refer you to a comment that Paul made about the peppers. And Paul, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, and if I don't, I trust that you'll correct me. The productivity went up, and the total commitment to pepper went down. So instead of X number of plants outside, X number of row feet of plastic, X number of row feet of drip irrigation, and so forth, it was a smaller number of plants inside, smaller investments, if you will, in that way in the crop, but productivity went up. And that's the idea behind this soil management schema, is that small investments over time keep adding up and will be important, and that's when you'll start really seeing the so-called cash return on investment in your soil health program. That's all I have for the moment. Annette, do we have time, or should we just transition? A couple of questions, and then we want to make sure we have time for the next one. Yes, ma'am.
Is anybody looking at the soil microbiology, what's happening with the organisms in the tunnel?
Question was, is anyone looking at the soil microbiology, what's happening with the organisms in the soil in the high tunnels? Very much so. They're looking at as much as they can receive support for it. I'm not trying to be facetious. No, it's work that's incredibly important, but does require certain technical skill and capacity that, you know, not everyone has. And so as we listen to, you know, growers and others, you know, with that question, we'd love to address that in great detail. Yeah. Other hands went. Yes, sir.
Hey, so with soil salinity, you know, it usually happens after like a couple of years of you're growing in there. You know, what's really the best way to deal with that? You can cover it when you're potting soil and kind of ignore that it happened and not really fix it. I guess you can like try and remove the top layer of soil, but how do you really fix soil salinity? Because there's nothing to wash out the salts.
So the question was, what are perhaps the best tactics to use to address soil salinity that may have built up over the first couple, 2-3 years? In my opinion, the first steps would be, one, test the irrigation water. Soil test. Then look carefully at what amendments that are being applied to the soil, and ask if in any of those three I can change up the load, if you will, the load of salinity that's being added. The fourth step, would be, you know, the irrigation plan. Has there ever, if the water quality checks out and the amendments are checking out, but it's just like I'm adding too much or whatever the case might be, can I actually take a time and flood that tunnel? And do I have the internal drainage that will allow it? Can I flush the tunnel? Can I move those salts down well below the root zone, so I don't have to skim off the soil or whatever it might be you know, that drastic of a step? So I'd check those first, you know, water quality, amendments, and the soil test itself.
I want to comment on that. So we had a 6-year-old tunnel and we put celery in it, and the celery was full of that salt. Like it was just
Celery, which is like 98% water. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really salty because I think it pulled some of that salt out of the soil.
Yeah, so the question, you know, the comment here was, you know, after 6 years, celery was planted in a tunnel, and it pulled up a lot of that salt, which reminds us there are crops or plants that will selectively pull certain chemistries, if you will, from the soil, and essentially what we call sequester or, you know, harbor them in their tissues. So some people will actually plant a salt-loving crop, pull that salt out of the soil, take it out of the tunnel. Okay, now that's another matter. Where does it go? But, you know, maybe there are more options, but people can literally extract salt from or some other components from the soil using crops. Yes?
The only problem that I've never been able to solve is the high phosphorus stuff. Do you have any recommendations? How does it move in the tunnel?
The question was how to address high soil phosphorus. I wish I knew.
So moving the tunnel is the right solution, maybe the only one?
The discussion I mentioned with the farmer last week started with that same question. And this was a farmer at the program to speak at the program. So both of us were lamenting that we don't see a clear path toward addressing very high soil test phosphorus levels. If there's a solution in the room, If you're willing to voice it and share it with everyone, great. If you're going to make $1 bazillion consulting with people on how to do that, I guess that's your prerogative. But I'm not trying to be facetious. I personally don't see a direct way. Krista, do you?
No, but I wanted to ask, maybe put you on the spot because this came up in the nutrient management session this morning, and I would happily be corrected on this. So I'm curious about your thoughts. When push comes to shove, how big we know phosphorus loading is a natural resource problem.
Yes.
I don't know, this is my ignorance, to what extent is high phosphorus a production problem?
To what extent is high phosphorus a production problem? In the light of, we know high phosphorus levels can be an issue, off-farm and on-farm. I don't know if it's a terribly high production issue. And I honestly don't know how terribly difficult or terribly high the movement is out of the tunnel, given that most tunnels don't experience that rainfall and that movement of soil, right? So I'm not here to say, especially publicly and recording, that high phosphorus levels are no big deal. But I do think this is an example like microbiology. I do think this is an example where some real collaborative work would need to be done to address that question on behalf of growers who have the situation and anybody else who lives around them or works on the farm. I just don't know. I think we're much more adept at answering that question from a field production because we've studied it a lot, right? But we just don't know what happens when you cover a piece of soil and there's a lot of phosphorus in there.
The only thing I would add is the solution that has worked for me the best is that site selection is so important.
Yes.
And I found out that solid ground tends to be the best ground to put your high tunnel on. Not a formal garden area, but a piece of solid ground is probably going to be lower in phosphorus. And be very careful about adding any of it that adds phosphorus because it just adds up every year.
I gave many High Tunnel 101 programs over the years, and at one time I was doing so with an extension colleague, and we had basically a scared straight routine. It wasn't purposeful, but it was like everyone was just so ridiculously enthusiastic about high tunnel production, but unaware of the challenges, and so we would highlight some of them from the beginning, and we just emphasized so hard, choose the right site. If you have an option, put a lot of effort into choosing and preparing that site. So I appreciate your comment about the history of that ground before you put a high tunnel on it, if you have an option. Maybe one more question and we should transition. Yes?
I was just wondering about how we would orient it. You want to like the prevailing winds at the side or at the ends?
How should we orient the tunnel since it's a rectangle? Do we want the long axis towards the wind or away from the wind? I and a number of other people have shared opinions on that. I've got some YouTube videos on it. My personal opinion is ultimately it will come down to the site. Are there other factors of the site that would make you orient it one way or the other? One of those factors is one high tunnel tends to create 2, tends to create 3, tends to create 4, so plan for expansion. Another one is, do you intend to grow year-round? In which case, in some latitudes, southern exposure of a long side is good, but that also means brutally hot in the summer, right? So all things being equal, I like prevailing winds to be able to go through the tunnel end to end. All things being equal, but they rarely are. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. As we transition over, I think I get the position of cleanup here after Matt and Paul, and I think I'm going to reinforce a lot of the things that they already talked about. And I think that's good because we are throwing a lot of information at you in one afternoon. So hopefully we'll keep going in that vein and it'll be good if I can work this thing. All right. Oh, it's touchy. Okay. I'm going the wrong way. Uh-oh, I'm giving my whole talk away. Oh, man.
Big button is forward, small button is backward. I have to learn that in 19.
Small button. Okay, there we go. All right, we're back. All right. So again, I'm Annette Wszelaki. I'm the Luddite of the group. I can't work the technology, but hopefully it'll get better. And I'm from the University of Tennessee, so not too far from here. And I've had the good fortune to work a lot with Krista Jacobson over the years. And a lot of these slides, you'll notice, have her name at the bottom because she has a lot of good slides that I think are worth talking about. This one, however, is not hers. So we know about rotation outside of the tunnel. We think about it a lot, especially organic growers, right? It does lots for you. It helps you with all of your pest and disease control and your weed control. And those same things apply, all the things on this slide. They help you with moisture. They help with so many things. But when we get in that tunnel, as you heard Paul say, we were growing in that tunnel 52 weeks a year. We don't want to necessarily have that same rotation because we also have those crops that are going to make us the most money per square foot, right? But it's even more important in the tunnel. So you've seen tomatoes in the tunnel now a few times during the last couple hours, and you've seen lettuce in the tunnels. And these tend to be our most grown crops because they're really profitable. So these are our first years in the tunnel. They look great. We have lots of good looking tomatoes. We have lots of lettuce. And then invariably, this is what they start to look like over time if we're not thinking about that rotation and really taking care of that soil so we're not getting some of these soil-borne diseases. There's a great picture of sclerotinia that Paul mentioned in his talk as well. But we start to see these soil-borne diseases creeping in. We see a lot of the issues that Matt mentioned creeping in, the salinity and other things in there. And the reason for that, I do want to stop here because we had the question about soil microbiology. And the other person who's on these slides, Julie Grossman from the University of Minnesota, is one of those people that's studying the soil microbiology. So she's a great resource and reference. So in our tunnels, these are basically irrigated deserts, right? As Matt said, we've covered that soil. We're production intensive because we can grow year round, and we also can be tillage intensive because we want to work that soil and get ready for the next crop. We're using a lot of irrigation because if we don't have a crop. It's warmer than the field and getting warmer every year, and we have that variability that Matt showed you on his slide of that night and day temperature. We also have the issue of we have our rows and we're trying to utilize every inch, as Paul showed you in his slide. He starts at that edge and really maximizes that space, but when we're maximizing that space, we're also maximizing those in between the rows that are getting compacted because we're walking on them and we're growing for longer. And so we have different nitrogen dynamics. And so all of these things we need to think about, especially in organic systems, because we're adding that manure or compost, and these are going to require that breakdown before they really become available to the plants. There are some tests that can help with that, and drip lines can give you additional nutrients, but there are a few options in an organic system. We use fish emulsion a lot. It likes to gunk up our system quite a bit, but we also use other sea products as well. There are some soluble fertilizers we can use, but those can lead to the salt buildup that Matt mentioned. So I'm going to talk a lot today about cover crops, but before I do, this is a picture that Matt showed you in his talk. But the thing about salinity is, and for those of you who are just starting out, it creeps up on you over time. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So I love this slide from Tim Coulong, who's now at the University of Georgia. But this is a grower who was growing for many years and then expanded his tunnel. And so it's probably hard to see in a room of this size, but this is the same variety of tomato that he was growing. Grew them exactly the same way, but the ones in the back that are tall were on new ground where he expanded that tunnel. So he calls Tim out to come to the farm And Tim's going, what's going on? Because these are the same tomatoes, they're handled the same way. And then they take that soil test. So the part of the tunnel he'd been growing in for many years has sky-high salinity levels. The new part had lower levels. So that's just to illustrate that these things don't happen, and when you don't see them side by side, sometimes you don't realize that it's happening until you have something like this that kind of smacks you in the face, right? So, how many people have ever used cover crops in their tunnels? A few of you. Great. So the next question is, which ones did you use that you liked or that you didn't like? Because both are useful. Buckwheat? Great. Anybody else? Ryegrass and a radish, okay. We're going to talk about all of these, I think. Clovers, okay. Matt, did you?
We were very impressed with millet and teff because of their biomass and drought tolerance. So, yeah.
Great. All right. So you heard some things that worked. We're going to talk about some that work and some that don't. But as Matt mentioned, you're not paid for your soil, but we need to take care of it to get those crops off the soil. And it's really critical, especially in our high tunnels, because of that premium space that we're using. So you want to think about, when we're thinking about cover crops, we want to think about nitrogen and other nutrient contributions we could have there, and those microbiological organisms in our soil and what they can do for us, and really feeding those systems. And then capturing those nutrients while getting the salts out. So we know, we heard clover up here, legumes are going to give us some of that nitrogen that we need, and they can give us a lot of nitrogen, and that is good because we heard about compost and manures. Matt mentioned be careful where you get your source. What he didn't say in there is we're seeing in Tennessee more and more folks that are bringing in compost from off their farm, and it has contamination from aminopyrrolid or clopyrrolid herbicides, and then they've just put it on their entire field or their entire farm, and they say, how long till this will be out of my soil? And there's no good answer to that. The best answer I can get from our weed people is years, because it's environmentally dependent, it's rain dependent. So if you're applying anything from off your farm by way of compost or manure, you want to be very careful and ask those questions, and better yet, do an assay. Do a green bean assay before you put it everywhere. Get a little cup, put some of that manure or compost that you want to use, put a bean in it. If it germinates and it looks good, you're probably safe. If it's all contorted, you probably have some herbicides in there that you do not want to put on your farm or your field. This is especially important for organic folks, because if you're certified organic, you just blew up your certification. You applied a prohibited substance unknowingly, but you still applied it. So it's really important to ask those questions for any inputs like compost and manure, because those herbicides go right through the animal system and are still viable. All right. I got off on a little tangent there that was non-cover crop related, but I thought it was important, so I thought I'd mention it. So the non-legumes are going to be really important in helping us capture those nutrients in the system. And so we're not leaching them out below where our plants can use them. And then just preventing that soil erosion, holding that soil in place, even in a high tunnel, is really important when we're the ones supplying the irrigation and feeding those communities. So I already mentioned some of the diseases that we commonly see in the tunnel, as did Paul. But cover crops can really fit into that integrated pest management strategy for us and help us combat some of those diseases. Nematodes are another issue that we're seeing more and more, and cover crops can help with that too. So the mighty mustard or the biofumigant crops, they're a great one for some of those diseases. Again, Rachel Rudolph, who's an excellent resource right here in Kentucky, has done a lot of work with biofumigation. So you can contact Rachel if you want specifics on that, because we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of biofumigation today. Nematodes. Velvet bean is one that's a good biocontrol for nematodes. So those nematodes have certain crops that they just don't do well with. Velvet bean is one of them that can help combat those. So we've talked about how you have that premium space, and you might not want to give it up for a crop that's not earning you money directly, but we'll also talk about that towards the end as well, how maybe a cover crop can earn you some more money. And anytime you're taking your crop out of a cash crop, you are giving up that time that it could be in something else. So you want to think about that timing and start thinking about what you put in your tunnel and where you might have these little pockets where you could capitalize on putting in a cover crop. All right, so how can we make cover crops work? First, we have to identify where can I have that time in my system where I could possibly fit one of these in. So for cover crops, the first thing is thinking about that time window. So are you growing tomatoes and then you're leaving your tunnel open for a few months maybe before you're planting something else in there? Do you have a window there in the summer? Or do you have a window between your tomato and lettuce? So think about, do you have a cool season window, a warm season window, and where those cover crops could fit into your system overall. Then you want to think about the nutrients. We talked a little bit about the phosphorus, but nitrogen is one that we can really bulk up through our cover crops, and we can help with those salts, and we'll talk about some of those crops that can pull the salts out as well. Then, do you have a particular problem in that tunnel that you're trying to combat, and think about what cover crops could help you with that. And then we need to think about the termination. So termination can often be an issue for folks in the field, and that's compounded in the tunnel because, just like with other crops, like the peppers Paul mentioned and the eggplant, we're going to have a lot of biomass from these cover crops. So you might know how they behave out in the field, but it's going to be a whole different environment once you get those in the tunnel, so you want to be aware of that. Matt showed you this slide, and I'm not going to dwell on it except to say that when you have a movable tunnel, it really does open up your rotation options and allows you to incorporate cover crops oftentimes more easily, and you're just limited by how much land you have to move that tunnel on. The other thing about movable tunnels, while they are great and open up your rotation options and make it easier for you to incorporate those tunnels, you want to make sure you have a way to batten them down. And we've seen that, especially here in Kentucky, unfortunately, but everywhere we're seeing more violent and violent weather patterns, and you want to be thinking about that with these tunnels. We have a collaborator in Maine who talked about his tunnel moving quite a distance in a storm and almost landed on a road. He said, thank goodness it didn't land on anybody when it flew. But that's another consideration that you want to think about with movable tunnels. All right, so if we're thinking about cool season covers, when are we going to plant those to get the maximum benefit? So if we plant them very late, we're not going to get that biomass, because often I've heard high tunnels sometimes referred to as like a cooler in the middle of winter. And we can often see this, that we put a crop in there and it's kind of stationary for a while until the weather gets right again, and then it takes off. So we want to think about that for cover crops too. The other thing is when we're planting, having the way to terminate that crop, and especially if it's not physiologically mature. And high biomass grasses can often tie up that nitrogen that we're trying to get into the soil. So we want to be aware of that as well and make sure that we're allowing enough time for things to break down before we get a cash crop back in there. So it can be a shift in how you think and how you rotate things because of that breakdown period that we often don't allow enough time for. So we can plant the crop late, and that's going to allow your plants to reach some maturity and terminate better. Or we can think outside the box a little bit and use a winter-killed summer crop for our early planting. So if we put a cover crop in there out of season, now the weather patterns can often take care of that for us. So that's another good strategy to use for your cover crops as well. And we'll talk more about adaptive management later, but that's really important. So for the warm season covers, we mentioned up here, buckwheat is a good one. And when you're growing it in a tunnel, it's going to be even faster than it is in the field. So in the field, we can grow a crop of buckwheat in about 60 days. In a tunnel, it's going to be 30 to 40 days. So really fast. It's a great habitat for your beneficials, so it's going to draw in a lot of those natural predators to take care of your aphids if you have them in the middle of the summer. It's also going to break down fairly readily, but some people don't like that it'll reseed pretty quick. We like that because it does a lot more for us. It's not just doing one thing, it's doing that IPM, it's taking care of our insects, so we don't mind it reseeding. Some people aren't as fond of that, so you just want to be aware of that. It'll also give you a couple of tons of biomass per acre and some nitrogen, so it's a good one. So when we think about cover crops in the tunnel, generally the way we're going to seed them is to broadcast them and then incorporate them lightly in that field. And then, as Matt mentioned, sometimes we don't think about irrigating our cover crops because we put them out there and they get rain, right? But in a tunnel, they don't have that. So you want to make sure you're planning to get a good stand of your cover crop as well, whether that's an overhead irrigation system or a heck of a lot of drip tape going down there. For termination, as I mentioned, that can be another issue because you're going to get a lot of biomass quickly. So mowing regularly can help keep it at a manageable level if that's something you're able to do between rows, if you're doing like a living cover between your rows or something like that. Or it can help with your termination, especially when you get to that physiological maturity. For organic folks, you do have a few organic herbicide options. We have not had a lot of luck with them on our farm. Most of them are just going to be burn downs, right? So they're going to be temporary. They'll knock back that cover crop for you, but they're not going to terminate it outright. It'll most likely keep growing again. We had a study a few years ago, a no-till broccoli study, and we were going to terminate it with our roller crimper. Well, when we wanted to terminate it and get our broccoli in, we rolled over it, it stood right back up. And we rolled it again, and it stood right back up. So now our roller crimper trial became an organic herbicide trial. And so we compared clove oil and vinegar, and we got everything planted. We got our broccoli transplants in. We left for the weekend. We came back on Monday, and some animal ate every transplant in our clove plots. So somehow clove and broccoli is a winning taste combination for some sort of animal. Just word to the wise out there. All right, so decomposition. That's another thing we need to think about. Usually when cover crops are decomposing in the spring out in the field, there's lots of water that helps with that decomposition, and we have the time. In a tunnel, if we don't have that water to help with decomposition, again, just like for germination, that cover crop's going to sit there longer on the surface or under the surface if we're tilling it in. So you want to be aware of that and have that water for decomposition as well, but also factor that decomposition time in. In the spring, we often have a grub issue if we till in our cover crop in the field and don't give it enough time to break down. The grubs are going crazy. Same thing would happen in your tunnel, and we want it to break down so we get those nutrients from our crop. So the other thing we need to think of is once we put in a new crop, the adaptive management strategies that we might need to use. So in a tunnel, if we don't have things breaking down, we might have to rake out the chunks of cover crop that are remaining there. And if we didn't get sufficient kill in that cover crop, or we get reseeding, it may regrow. So you want to be prepared for that as well. And then we might have residue that's tying up their nitrogen. And I'll show you some photos of that in a little bit here. But foliar testing can be really critical to help you understand what's going on in that plant and make some adjustments during the season. So you can do this a couple of ways for foliar testing. You could either get your own nitrate meter, which we have on our farm, or there's a lot of ag testing services where you can take the leaves and send them off. In Tennessee, we have the Tennessee Farmers Co-op. Part of their services, and our growers love this, is they come out and do the plant sampling for our growers. They send them off and give you the results. Their angle is once they give you those results, they're trying to sell their product and telling you what you need to put back in there. But it's a great service for the growers that say, I don't have time to go around doing my own tissue sampling, and so they do it for you. I don't know if a similar service exists in Kentucky, but there are a lot of places that might do that, so that's a great thing. But for something like tomato, you're going to pick off 20 to 25 young, fully mature leaves, and then you're going to send them off, and they're going to tell you exactly what's happening in those plants when you get the results back. So if you see there's an issue, now you can make adjustments and supplement your fertility in real time. So a project that we had a few years ago, getting on to a lot of years ago now, it seems like, Chris. We had a project looking at, do the benefits of cover crops outweigh the costs of replacing that lettuce cash crop in the winter time? So we looked at 4 different fall-winter treatments. One was just a winter wheat cover crop. One was crimson clover. One was a combination of those two, which is a great strategy for any cover cropping system. If we have a mixture of crops, if one for some reason doesn't come up, we have some backup insurance, and they can fulfill different needs in that system. So that's great too. Lots of the wheats, grasses, grains are great for that weed control, and then we know we have that nitrogen from the clover mix. And then we had a lettuce cash crop. So we used winter density, and then we switched to Calura the second year. So all of our cover crops were sown and our lettuce were planted in October, and then we mowed them down in early March, and then we tilled them in 5 days later, and then we used Nature Safe on the field and spread it and tilled it in, and we made sure that our fertilizer amount was based on our nitrogen credit from our biomass from our cover crops. And then after we did all that, we planted our early girl tomatoes in late March. So I did want to mention this cover crop calculator to determine your nitrogen credit. This one is from Oregon, and it's not going to be perfect because it is tailored to the Pacific Northwest, but if you're not accounting for your cover crop nitrogen at all, it's better than nothing, and it's a good place to start. So I like this because it also has a large farm calculator in acre units, but it has a small farm calculator as well on 1,000 square foot units. So great for a tunnel system as well. Lots of good stuff in there. And this is what it looks like. So you get your cover crop analysis back from the lab, send off a sample when you're getting ready to terminate it. And it has your sample, your area sampled, the fresh weight of the sample, the nitrogen percent you get back from the lab, and the dry matter from the lab. And you plug it in, and then it gives you a number of what your nitrogen credit would be from that cover crop. So in our study, we noticed pretty early on that we could see a visual difference in our crimson clover plots and our winter wheat cover crop plots after we planted our tomatoes. So the tomatoes and that winter wheat were noticeably shorter. So we did some subjective plant ratings where we went through and rated them, and sure enough, we just did a health rating from least healthy to most healthy. We did see a difference with that winter wheat cover crop because it was probably tying up some of our nitrogen. These are our yields, and they're kind of abysmal, and I should say here that the reason we undertook this project was because we were already having high tunnel issues. We were those people that have been growing in tunnels for that 5 to 10 year period, and that's when all the issues start showing up. So what we found in a hurry was that our soil really was way out of whack, and we were trying to get it back in line with some of our cover cropping. So what you'll notice here is, even by year, our first year was better than our second year. Kentucky outgrew us in Tennessee in both years, but our second year, we really saw some disorders going on, which spoke to the imbalances in our soil. And the disorder that we saw was yellow shoulder disorder, which is one that's not extremely well understood in the scientific community, but some of the things that contribute to it are the environment. So greater than 90 degrees. Well, A tunnel in Kentucky or Tennessee in the summer, how often does it get above 90 degrees? Even in the spring and fall, right, every day. So we're dealing with that really high temperature environment. Then it can be a nutrition issue. So we showed you our cover crops in there. There can be a cultivar issue, and before anybody asks, I have not found a good reference for cultivars that are less likely to have yellow shoulder disorder. We can tell you that Early Girl is not one that is less susceptible. It was very susceptible to yellow shoulder disorder. And then there's often thought to be a virus component as well. So it's also thought to be triggered by insufficient exchangeable potassium in your soil and an excess of magnesium in relation to your calcium, or if you have high pH in there. So pH can be really important, but this is where that tissue analysis can help you again, because if we're getting a tissue test at the first flower, then we can make a correction before that fruit is about an inch wide, and that can really make all the difference. So we can up that potassium to greater than 3%, and then we could also look at increasing that magnesium to calcium ratio of our system. So we want 1 to 6 or 1 to 4. And just like if anybody grows blueberries, if your soil pH is high, we can adjust that soil pH with sulfuric or citric acid to bring it back down within that 6.4 to 6.7 range. And when we get that tissue test back, we can put on the appropriate fertilizers there. So, what our takeaways were from our study were that the positive effects of cover crops can take several years. So we know this from the field as well. The legume did better for us than the wheat by itself because we were tying up that nitrogen. It was good for outcompeting the weeds, but we didn't want it tying up our nitrogen. We had that high percentage. It got worse in 2018, which was an extremely hot year for us. So now we're going to take the rest of the time and go through some of the cover crops that might be worthwhile looking at inside a tunnel. So we already mentioned those winter-killed summer crops that can naturally help terminate themselves because they're just out of season. If we're planting them out of season, we can get that kill for them. Then we have some of the warmer season crops, which we might want to think about in that heat of the summer, things like sun hemp and teosinte. And I often show this slide, and people don't have Krista to benefit in the room, and I tell people she's a bit taller than me. So all of you that know Krista know that that sun hemp is quite tall inside that tunnel if it's towering over Krista. All right, so some of these things, clovers, the peas, the wheats, the oats, those are the standard ones that we look at, and those are great. We have to consider that vigor, and that's maybe the most important take-home message. You're going to get a lot of biomass in your tunnel. We want to shift that thinking about your irrigation. You're not used to irrigating a cover crop. You have to irrigate in the tunnel. And then that decomposition, you want to be prepared for that and allow for at least 2 to 3 weeks before you're going in there with your cash crop. More is better. So this is one, I'm just going to roll through several examples of these, but black oats is one that's going to give you a lot of biomass. It's good for weed suppression, and it's going to be a rapid grower. So it's a good one to think about if you're really after weed control in your tunnel. Triticale, another one. It has that high saline tolerance, so if you're not incorporating it, you could chop it and take it out, and it'll trap some of those salts for you. So we were talking about that during Matt's talk, and that might be one to consider. It's also going to tolerate later fall planting. It has a nice fibrous root system, so it's going to do a lot of good micro-tillage for you. And then some that maybe aren't so, one that isn't so good here. So this is, I can't ever pronounce this one right, Festilolium, and it's one that's a cross between perennial ryegrass and meadow fescue. It has really rapid germination, but it can be slower to establish, and because of its fine leaves, it's not going to smother the weeds as well as some of the others do, and you can see some weeds poking through there on that photo. I did also want to mention this publication, that we did. It's cool season cover crops for high tunnels in the southeast. So this has a great table of all, well, not all, but a good number of cover crop options that you might want to look at, and that will give you an idea of what they do the best at, so you can match it up to your needs in your high tunnel as well. Some of the summer cover crops, and this slide just shows you how much biomass you can get from some of these cover crops. So you can see that golden sun hemp there and the teosinte. We have like 6 to 7 tons of biomass, which is insane in a tunnel. So again, you have to be prepared to deal with all that biomass, but you can see a lot of these are going to give you a heck of a lot of biomass, which will take some time to break down, but also going to add a lot to your soil, so good benefits there. Sesame is one that we've looked at in the field, and I think it's one that's gaining in popularity. It's another one that has high biomass, good weed suppression. It's one that's quickly decomposing, so that's another good consideration. If you want a tunnel, if you want to crop in the tunnel, but you're worried about the time to get that next cycle of your cash crops in, looking for these that are quickly decomposing is a good strategy. It's also been used for nematode suppression. So if you know that you have a nematode issue, it's a non-host for nematodes, and they'll go farther afield to find a host. Matt mentioned millet. This is Japanese millet. So it's a low water user, which could be a consideration depending on that system. We still need to have some water in there. It also has high heat and drought tolerance. So a good one for the summer if you're throwing a cover crop in there. It's going to be rapidly growing and maturing. It has high biomass, less than German millet, but still high biomass. Good weed suppression as well. It's going to be about a 45-day crop, and it will have vigorous regrowth with mowing. So that's also one of your management options is to mow it. It's one that pairs well with cowpea, and cowpea is one of our favorites. It's called the million seed plant for a reason. So you want to make sure that you're terminating before it sets seeds if that's going to be an issue over time for you. This is its relative German millet. So it's also a low water user, high biomass, going to mature about 7 to 10 days later than Japanese millet, but another good one for weed suppression. Iron and clay cowpea. This is one that we love out in the field. It also works well in a tunnel. For us, when we till it under, it's like night and day between the field next to it. It's like a nice sponge. It adds so much good organic matter. It's going to give you a lot of nitrogen. So generally estimated about 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. It's another one that's going to decompose rapidly. So again, that's an important consideration. We're trying to maximize the cash crops we're growing in there. It's another one that's saline, drought, and very heat tolerant. So all good qualities if we're trying to get a crop in that July, August range. When Paul mentioned that he would solarize, it might be a time to get a good cover crop in there. It is also, iron and clay particularly, is one that can suppress nematodes, and not all cowpeas will do that. This is Chinese red pea. It's going to be similar to cowpea, but it's going to vine more and be later maturing. It's also going to give us some nitrogen, also low water use and saline tolerance. It's one that's easy to establish, so it's a good alternative as well. And then somebody mentioned the radish in the back, and Matt mentioned the deep tillage. This is a natural deep tiller, right? So that sod buster radish, it's going to go down there and help if you have a hard pan. It's going to be good for late summer once the soil starts to cool down, since it is a radish, a brassica, and that taproot can really help break up compaction that you get in your tunnels, especially in between those rows where we're walking all the time. The challenge with any brassica cover crop is it is in that brassica family. So if brassicas are in your cash crop rotation, you want to be aware of that, because the same pests and diseases that go to your cash crop are going to be with the sodbuster radish as well. Sun hemp, we already showed you the slide with the sun hemp. It's a good nitrogen fixer. It's one that can get woody stems pretty quickly, so you want to make sure you have a way to manage those. That can be a challenge. It's a low water user, also good for nematodes, and it has a deep taproot. But again, lots of biomass. You have to be prepared to deal with that one. Just like with the cool season cover crops, we have a warm season cover crop fact sheet that has the same table to go through the warm season cover crops. So you can check that out as well. And then if you're really hesitant because you're saying, I don't want to give up that space, think about the 2-for-1 options. Those crops that you can harvest and use in another way on your farm. So sunflowers are a great one. They're a nutrient scavenger. They're another one that'll pull that salt out of the system. And if you're sticking them in your CSA box or selling them at the market, that's taking them out of your system. So they'll take their salt and sell it to somebody in a bouquet for $10 at the market, right? 2 for 1, 15. For how many? All right, see, 15, even better. So from your stems, if you are growing your sunflowers, you want to pick a pollen-less variety for your bouquets so it's not going over on everybody's table when they get it home and they go, oh, now I have this pollen to deal with. Lots of colors and sizes, as you can see in this photo, short, tall, small, big, so lots of variety there. But that's one that could help get that salt out of your soil, and you're naturally going to cut it and take it out of there anyway. Buckwheat, as we've mentioned a couple times, it's a good fast grower, great for those beneficials, rapidly decomposing, good filler in a bouquet because lots of flowers there. Dwarf sorghum is another one. It's going to be excellent for weed suppression. It gets about 3 to 4 feet tall in the field, so probably double that in a tunnel. Lots and lots of biomass. So again, it would be a way that you can get a lot of organic matter in there. But look at those seed heads that it has on it. Really cool if you're going to stick them in some sort of a bouquet. And then the mustards. We talked about them a little bit, but they can really help with those soil-borne diseases. The bioactive compounds, if you're really trying to get that 2-for-1, are going to vary by species and by cultivar. So the Indian mustard is one that's generally going to have a high level of the glucosinolates or those compounds that are going to have that disease suppressive effect. So you want to think about that. And you want to terminate it during flowering. So you could cut some and till some in to get the double benefit of having a product to sell from your cover crop, but also getting that disease suppression benefit. Phacelia is another one that looks really cool. Lots of biomass, good weed suppression, good beneficial attractor, and scavenges your nutrients for you. It is going to reseed if you let it, so you want to be aware of that as well. But again, if it reseeds, now you have another bouquet to sell, right? Barley is another one that you can think about. It is going to give you a lot of biomass, but good visual interest with it too. It's going to be a slow decomposer though, so you want to make sure if you're using something like a barley, you're going to be able to wait the amount of time that you need for it to decompose or be able to hasten that decomposition. It is a good nitrogen scavenger. It's very cold hardy, so this would be a good winter crop that you could stick in there. All right, so high tunnel rotations, they are even more complex than field rotations. I think we've established that in the last few hours. Like the field, no 2 years are going to be the same, and those swings in the tunnel can be even more dramatic from night to day temperature and even seasonal temperatures when we get these 70-degree days in December, and then a couple days or weeks later we're down into the 20s or 30s. Just when you think you got it figured out, it's going to throw you a curveball. So keep trying if something doesn't work the first time. Lots of resources I put in here. If anybody wants a copy of this presentation, you can email me and I'd be happy to send it to you. This was our high tunnel a few years ago. After our SARE project was over, we threw the kitchen sink in our tunnel. So we did a mix of cowpea, buckwheat, sunflower, mustard, and millet all at once. And we used all of that those good millet heads and our sunflowers to do bouquets for our CSA. So we were still getting that benefit that way. But we threw a little of everything in there. We wanted those sunflowers to get the salt out of our soil, and we put some cowpeas in there for nitrogen. We got the mustard in there for the disease suppression, so we just did it all in one fell swoop.